Capitalism, Socialism, and Democracy by Joseph Schumpeter. Second edition, 1942-1947. Excerpts read by Jim Kelly. Chapter 14, Decomposition. Faced by the increasing hostility of the environment and by the legislative, administrative, and judicial practice born of that hostility, entrepreneurs and capitalists, in fact the whole stratum that accepts the bourgeois scheme of life, will eventually cease to function. Their standard aims are rapidly becoming unattainable, their efforts futile. The most glamorous of these bourgeois aims, the foundation of an industrial dynasty, has in most countries become unattainable already, and even more modest ones are so difficult to attain that they may cease to be thought worth the struggle as the permanence of these conditions is being increasingly realized. It is hence interesting to observe that the bourgeois capitalist motivation not only is threatened by forces external to the bourgeois mind, but that it also tends to die out from internal causes. There is, of course, close interdependence between the two, but we cannot get at the true diagnosis unless we try to disentangle them. One of those internal causes we have already met with. I have dubbed it evaporation of the substance of property. We have seen that, normally, the modern businessman, whether entrepreneur or mere managing administrator, is of the executive type. From the logic of his position, he acquires something of the psychology of the salaried employee working in a bureaucratic organization. Whether a stockholder or not, his will to fight and to hold on is not and cannot be what it was with the man who knew ownership and its responsibilities in the full-blooded sense of those words. His system of values and his conception of duty undergo a profound change. Mere stockholders, of course, have ceased to count at all, quite independently of the clipping of their share by a regulating and taxing state. Thus the modern corporation, although the product of the capitalist process, socializes the bourgeois mind. It relentlessly narrows the scope of capitalist motivation. Not only that, it will eventually kill its roots. Still more important, however, is another internal cause, the disintegration of the bourgeois family. The facts to which I am referring are too well known to need explicit statement. To men and women in modern capitalist societies, family life and parenthood mean less than they meant before, and hence are less powerful molders of behavior. The rebellious son or daughter who professes contempt for Victorian standards is, however incorrectly, expressing an undeniable truth. As soon as men and women learn the utilitarian lesson and refuse to take for granted the traditional arrangements that their social environment makes for them, as soon as they acquire the habit of weighing the individual advantages and disadvantages of any prospective course of action, or as we might also put it, as soon as they introduce into their private life a sort of inarticulate system of cost accounting, they cannot fail to become aware of the heavy personal sacrifices that family ties, and especially parenthood, entail under modern conditions, and of the fact that, at the same time, except in the cases of farmers and peasants, children cease to be economic assets. These sacrifices do not consist only of the items that come within the reach of the measuring rod of money, but comprise, in addition, an indefinite amount of loss of comfort, of freedom from care, and opportunity to enjoy alternatives of increasing attractiveness and variety, alternatives to be compared with joys of parenthood that are being subjected to a critical analysis of increasing severity. The implication of this is not weakened, but strengthened by the fact that the balance sheet is likely to be incomplete, perhaps even fundamentally wrong. For the greatest of the assets, the contribution made by parenthood to physical and moral health, normality, as we might express it, particularly in the case of women, almost invariably escapes the rational searchlight of modern individuals who, in private as in public life, tend to focus attention on ascertainable details of immediate utilitarian relevance and to sneer at the idea of hidden necessities of human nature or of the social organism. The point I wish to convey is, I think, clear without further elaboration. It may be summed up in the question that is so clearly in many potential parents' minds. Why should we stunt our ambitions and impoverish our lives in order to be insulted and looked down upon in our old age? While the capitalist process, by virtue of the psychic attitudes it creates, progressively dims the values of family life and removes the conscientious inhibitions that an old moral tradition would have put in the way toward a different scheme of life, it at the same time implements the new tastes. As regards childlessness, capitalist inventiveness produces contraceptive devices of ever-increasing efficiency that overcome the resistance which the strongest impulse of man would otherwise have put up. As regards the style of life, capitalist evolution decreases the desirability of and provides alternatives to the bourgeois family home. Until the later decades of the 19th century, the townhouse and the country place were everywhere not only pleasant and convenient shells of private life on the higher levels of income, but they were indispensable. Not only hospitality on any scale and in any style, but even the comfort, dignity, repose, and refinement of the family depended on its having an adequate foyer of its own that was adequately staffed. The arrangements summarized by the term home were accordingly accepted as a matter of course by the average man and woman of bourgeois standing, exactly as they looked upon marriage and children, the founding of a family, as a matter of course. Now, on the one hand, the amenities of the bourgeois home are becoming less obvious than are its burdens. To the critical eye of a critical age, it is likely to appear primarily as a source of trouble and expense which frequently failed to justify themselves. This would be so even independently of modern taxation and wages and of the attitude of modern household personnel, all of which are typical results of the capitalist process and, of course, greatly strengthen the case against what, in the near future, will be almost universally recognized as an outmoded and uneconomical way of life. In this respect, as in others, we are living in a transitional stage. The average family of bourgeois standing tends to reduce the difficulties of running the big house and the big country place by substituting for it small and mechanized establishments plus a maximum of outside service and outside life, hospitality in particular being increasingly shifted to the restaurant or club. On the other hand, the home of the old type is no longer an indispensable requirement of comfortable and refined living in the bourgeois sphere. The apartment house and the apartment hotel represent a rationalized type of abode and another style of life which, when fully developed, will no doubt meet the new situation and provide all the essentials of comfort and refinement. To be sure, neither that style nor its shell are fully developed anywhere as yet, and they offer cost advantage only if we count in the trouble and annoyance incident to running a modern home. But other advantages they offer already: the facility of using to the full the variety of modern enjoyments of travel, of ready mobility, of shifting the load of the current little things of existence to the powerful shoulders of highly specialized organizations. It is easy to see how this in turn bears, in the upper strata of capitalist society, upon the problems of the child. Again, there is interaction, the passing of the spacious home, in which alone the rich life of a numerous family could unfold, and the increasing friction with which it functions supply another motive for avoiding the cares of parenthood. But the decline of large families in turn renders the spacious home less worthwhile. In order to realize what all this means for the efficiency of the capitalist engine of production, we need only recall that the family and the family home used to be the mainspring of the typically bourgeois kind of profit motive. Economists have not always given due weight to this fact. When we look more closely at their idea of the self-interest of entrepreneurs and capitalists, we cannot fail to discover that the results it was supposed to produce are really not at all what one would expect from the rational self-interest of the detached individual or the childless couple who no longer look at the world through the windows of a family home. Consciously or unconsciously, they analyze the behavior of the man whose views and motives are shaped by such a home, and who means to work and to save primarily for wife and children. As soon as these fade out from the moral vision of the businessman, we have a different kind of homo economicus before us, who cares for different things and acts in different ways. For him, and from the standpoint of his individualistic utilitarianism, the behavior of that old type would in fact be completely irrational. He loses the only sort of romance and heroism that is left in the unromantic and unheroic civilization of capitalism, and he loses the capitalist ethics that enjoins working for the future, irrespective of whether or not one is going to harvest the crop oneself. With the decline of the driving power supplied by the family motive, the businessman's time horizon shrinks, roughly, to his life expectation, and he might now be less willing than he was to fulfill that function of earning, saving, and investing, even if he saw no reason to fear that the results would but swell his tax bills. He drifts into an anti-saving frame of mind and accepts with an increasing readiness anti-saving theories that are indicative of a short-run philosophy. But anti-saving theories are not all that he accepts. With a different attitude to the concern he works for, and with a different scheme of private life, he tends to acquire a different view of the values and standards of the capitalist order of things. Perhaps the most striking feature of the picture is the extent to which the bourgeoisie, besides educating its own enemies, allows itself in turn to be educated by them. It absorbs the slogans of current radicalism and seems quite willing to undergo a process of conversion to a creed hostile to its very existence. Haltingly and grudgingly, it concedes in part the implications of that creed. This would be most astonishing and indeed very hard to explain were it not for the fact that the typical bourgeois is rapidly losing faith in his own creed. And this again becomes fully understandable as soon as we realize that the social conditions which account for its emergence are passing. This is verified by the very characteristic manner in which particular capitalist interests and the bourgeoisie as a whole behave when facing direct attack. They talk and plead or hire people to do it for them. They snatch at every chance of compromise. They are ever ready to give in. They never put up a fight under the flag of their own ideals and interests. In this country, Germany, there was no real resistance anywhere against the imposition of crushing financial burdens during the last decade, or against labor legislation incompatible with the effective management of industry. Now, as the reader will surely know by this time, I am far from overestimating the political power of either big business or the bourgeoisie in general. Moreover, I am prepared to make large allowances for cowardice. But still, means of defense were not entirely lacking, as yet, and history is full of examples of the success of small groups who, believing in their cause, were resolved to stand by their guns. The only explanation for the meekness we observe is that the bourgeois order no longer makes any sense to the bourgeoisie itself, and that, when all is said and nothing is done, it does not really care. Thus, the same economic process that undermines the position of the bourgeoisie by decreasing the importance of the functions of entrepreneurs and capitalists, by breaking up protective strata and institutions, and by creating an atmosphere of hostility, also decomposes the motor forces of capitalism from within. Nothing else shows so well that the capitalist order not only rests on props made of extra-capitalist material, but also derives its energy from extra-capitalist patterns of behavior, which at the same time it is bound to destroy. We have rediscovered what, from different standpoints, and so I believe on inadequate grounds, has often been discovered before, There is inherent in the capitalist system a tendency towards self-destruction which, in its earlier stages, may well assert itself in the form of a tendency towards retardation of progress. I shall not repeat how objective and subjective economic and extra-economic factors, reinforcing each other in imposing accord, contribute to that result. Nor shall I show what should be obvious, and in subsequent chapters will become more obvious still, that those factors make not only for the destruction of the capitalist, but for the emergence of a socialist civilization. They all point in that direction. The capitalist process not only destroys its own institutional framework, but it also creates the conditions for another. Destruction may not be the right word after all. Perhaps I should have spoken of transformation. The outcome of the process is not simply a void that could be filled by whatever might happen to turn up. Things and souls are transformed in such a way as to become increasingly amenable to the socialist form of life. With every peg removed from under the capitalist structure vanishes an impossibility of the socialist plan. But our answer to the decomposition question that heads this part posits far more problems than it solves. In view of what is to follow in this book, the reader should bear in mind, first, that so far we have not learned anything about the kind of socialism that may be looming in the future. For Marx and for most of his followers, and this was and is one of the most serious shortcomings of their doctrine, socialism meant just one definite thing. But the definiteness really goes no further than nationalization of industry would carry us, and with this an indefinite variety of economic and cultural possibilities will be seen to be compatible. Second, that similarly we know nothing as yet about the precise way by which socialism may be expected to come, except that there must be a great many possibilities ranging from a gradual bureaucratization to the most picturesque revolution. Strictly speaking, we do not even know whether socialism will actually come to stay. For, to repeat, perceiving a tendency and visualizing the goal of it is one thing, and predicting that this goal will actually be reached and that the resulting state of things will be workable, let alone permanent, is quite another thing. Before humanity chokes or basks in the dungeon or paradise of socialism, it may well burn up in the horrors or glories of imperialist wars. Third, the various components of the tendency we have been trying to describe, while everywhere discernible, have, as yet, nowhere fully revealed themselves. Things have gone to different lengths in different countries, but in no country so far enough to allow us to say with any confidence precisely how far they will go, or to assert that their underlying trend has grown too strong to be subject to anything more serious than temporary reverses. Industrial integration is far from being complete. Competition, actual and potential, is still a major factor in any business situation. Enterprise is still active, the leadership of the bourgeois group still the prime mover of the economic process, the middle class is still a political power, bourgeois standards and bourgeois motivations, though being increasingly impaired, are still alive. Survival of traditions and family ownership of controlling parcels of stock still make many an executive behave as the owner-manager did of old. The bourgeois family has not yet died. In fact, it clings to life so tenaciously that no responsible politician has, as yet, dared to touch it by any method other than taxation. From the standpoint of immediate practice, as well as for the purposes of short-run forecasting, and in these things a century is short-run, all this surface may be important than the tendency toward another civilization that slowly works deep down below.